This is Franklin Rye, and welcome back to Political Spirits. We still stand for the proposition that the left and the right should have a few drinks and talk. Compromise is not a requirement. If those discussions result in us changing or even abandoning our positions, that's fine. If they don't, that's fine too. We just need to talk to each other. In that way, we can unify through speech. And if the discussion becomes a bit heated, at the end of the night, we should still be able to split up the bar tab and be on our way. So what are we going to talk about this week? Well, you know I love movies. Old ones, new ones, action flicks, science fiction, comedies, although not so much recent comedies, and dramas. I went to a huge event recently, and as I came back, I was thinking about a movie. Not one that you would necessarily connect with this event. In fact, if I mentioned the event and the movie now, you'd probably ask me what does one have to do with the other. So let's hold off on mentioning the film for a moment. The event was President Trump's rally in Orlando announcing the kickoff for his re-election run. Now you've heard about it. You've probably seen a lot of the footage from inside the arena. There were over 20,000 people who attended in the arena. I went to talk to people in the line to get in. Among other reasons, I went to get a better sense of the base of the president's support and the level of and intensity of that support. Now, I regularly attend the Trump 45 Club monthly meetings in West Palm Beach, Florida. They bill themselves as the largest Trump club in the country, and based on the attendance, I don't doubt that claim. The attendance when I've gone has ranged from around 1,200 to 2,000 people. That's very significant for a monthly meeting. There are, however, very interesting and prominent nationally known speakers at those events. Examples include Sebastian Gorka, Sean Spicer, and Dan Bongino. But still, up to 2,000 people for a monthly political event is a lot. The problem with relying on the Trump 45 West Palm Beach attendance as a major indicator of the strength of engagement of President Trump's base is that Palm Beach County, from an age perspective, is not that representative of the rest of the country. It has a disproportionate number of seniors, and we all know that the level of political engagement of seniors is substantially higher than other age groups. Indeed, the Trump 45 meetings in West Palm do have a disproportionate number of seniors in attendance, and there can be no doubt that their participation in the election in support of President Trump will be a key to whether he'll be reelected. But I wanted to see just how far his energized support extends into other groups, such as, for example, other age groups. To do that, I really needed to go up to Orlando and see and talk to those in line for the Trump rally. I have to admit, on my way up, I was a bit hesitant, because I was somewhat concerned there might be aggressive protesters accosting the people walking to the event. Having never attended anything in the Amway Center, I really didn't know how far away I was going to have to park, and I had visions of having to run a gauntlet of Antifa thugs to get there. I even joked with some friends that if I'm attacked by Antifa, I hope somebody films it so I can get on Fox News and mention the podcast. Thankfully, I paid $20 to park and didn't have to walk that far, and I didn't see a single protester. What I did see was one heck of a lot of people lined up to see the president. I saw lots of vendors selling all sorts of pro-Trump merchandise and plenty of patriotic merchandise. Not surprisingly, I also saw some very humorous pro-Trump products, including ones where I'd have to use that popping cork sound to censor multiple words if I actually told you what those shirts said. That part reminded me of when I attended the 1992 Republican National Convention in the Houston Astrodome. Someone was selling a t-shirt using a modified version of the slogan in a popular anti-drug commercial of the time. They had changed it so that the front depicted a red elephant over the statement, "This is your brain," and the back depicted a blue donkey over the statement, "This is your brain on drugs. Any questions?" I once wore that shirt to a street party in the neighborhood where I used to live. I remember two neighbors read the front and then asked me to turn around to show them the back. I did. One of them chuckled, and the other, clearly a Democrat, said, "Ha ha, very funny," and that was it. I think now about the fact that these days you'd have to worry that if you wore something similar today, You'd risk an angry encounter, perhaps being unfriended on social media, or otherwise suffering some sort of social punishment. And you might even be attacked physically or your property damaged. It's a reminder that as much as we've advanced in the last 25 plus years, we've also gone backwards. So back to the rally. There was an enormous fenced-off area near the arena that was packed with supporters who had lined up incredibly early and made it into that fenced-off area when they opened it. It was, in effect, the equivalent of a massively expanded maze system like what you see at amusement park rides. There's an enormous line, and then when you make it through that line, you get put into the maze, and you feel like, hey, I've made it to the next step. In that respect, it's sort of like going to the emergency room when they move you from the waiting area to that occupied room or gurney, and you think you've made real progress, but you really have no idea how long it's going to take before a doctor actually sees you. So those people who had made it to the fenced-off area were all herded together in an open lot in the sun and blistering heat of Central Florida with no trees at all. Lots of people had golf umbrellas, and at that time they had them open, not for protection from rain, but rather from the blistering sun. In fact, many of these people had been lined up for more than a day, some for multiple days, before being allowed into the fenced-off area. Outside the fenced-off area was an enormous and rapidly growing line. It was the people in that line that I talked to. And as I did talk to them and observe them, what I noticed was that this was a considerably different crowd from the Trump 45 crowd in West Palm Beach. It was different in that it was on average considerably younger. There were a very large number of seniors, but there were also very large numbers of middle-aged people, families, persons in their 20s, and even some teenagers. Based on what you hear from the press, you'd expect the crowd to be almost entirely white. And it was disproportionately white. But it also included a very significant portion of Hispanics. There were also a fair number of African American attendees. Clearly, as a percentage, the African American attendees were down in the single digits. But think about what it would take for a black person to attend that rally, given the way the media and the Democrat Party portrays President Trump and his supporters. Any African American that showed up would likely be risking being ostracized by many fellow blacks and Democrats of any race. It's sad, but true. And notwithstanding that fact, there were a fair number of African Americans in attendance. What struck me overall about the makeup of the crowd is how typical, how average, how man in the street and woman in the street they were. The crowd was comprised of thousands of ordinary Americans. To observe that crowd was to realize how deceptive, biased, and unprofessional the media's depictions of Trump supporters actually are. I saw no evidence of racism. I saw no evidence of fascism. I saw no evidence of anything other than thousands of people with political opinions that happen to differ from those of some others in society. So we know that thousands of people attended, and that alone tends to indicate that President Trump is in a stronger position for re-election than the media would tend to indicate. But what about those polls? Multiple polls showing multiple Democrats defeating President Trump. What do we make of those? Well, first of all, as you've probably heard multiple commentators mention, at least on more conservative sites, polls this early are not reliable indicators of who will actually win. Over the last several presidents, numerous polls this far out have tended to be wildly off base and not indicative of who actually won the upcoming election. But this rally showed something more. Another reason to believe that those polls simply are not worth being concerned about. How engaged and dedicated did this rally show Trump's base to be? While I was there talking to people in the line, the rain came in. It started as a sprinkle, and then it started to build. The wind picked up, and we heard thunder. Close. The crackling of lightning. The winds got so bad that my MAGA hat was blown off my head. From behind. Not the typical instance where the wind gets under the bill in front and picks it up, but rather the wind from behind me was so severe that it blew the hat off my head without even going up under the bill. I can drive my boat with a hat turned around, and it doesn't come off. So this wind was stronger than that. I started to wonder if it was going to build further, if it was going to reach the point where any trees were in danger of going over. Then the heavy rains hit. I crossed the street and hid in the shadow of a high-rise office building. Because the winds were so strong, the heavy rains were coming in at a severe angle, which allowed the high-rise to act as a shield from the rain. I looked back, and what did I see? The people in line hadn't moved. Even the seniors hadn't moved. Now, I know that seniors are typically more dedicated to the political process than others. But these were heavy rains and strong winds, and the combination was one heck of a lot colder than what you would ever expect in June in Florida. And almost none of the Trump supporters in the line moved. They stood there, taking it. If this were a high school football game, the stands would have been cleared. Everybody would have been ordered to take cover. The storm was electrical, in addition to being dangerously windy and involving heavy rains. The message was clear. These Trump supporters, the base, would drag themselves across broken glass to get to the polling place and cast their ballots for Donald Trump. No matter what the polls might tell you right now, no matter what the news media says, at this point the message is clear. Donald Trump is in line to be reelected. He hasn't lost any of his base. The level of intensity is incredible. So while I said the attendees were very much ordinary Americans, in their level of intensity of support for their candidate, they were absolutely extraordinary. Nobody on the Democrat side of the fence is exhibiting anything even remotely close to that level of intensity of support from his or her base. I've said it before and I'll say it again. So long as we don't go into a recession, I expect Donald Trump to be reelected as president. So what was the movie that this rally reminded me of, and why? Believe it or not, the movie was It's a Wonderful Life, that Christmas classic starring Jimmy Stewart. If you've seen the movie, you're probably wondering what on earth that has to do with this rally. Well, I didn't get that sense while I was there. I got it while I was driving home. As I started to really think about the people I had met, the people I'd seen, the people I'd talked to, I started to think about just how typical they were, just ordinary Americans in Orlando to support the presidential candidate of their choice. And I started to think about the way they're depicted in the media, and unfortunately by many other Americans, often parroting what they hear and see in the media. The allegation that angers me the most is that Trump supporters are racist. There's nothing to support that claim. As I've said before on the podcast, there's nothing to support the claim that Trump himself is racist. But that doesn't stop the news media, Hollywood celebrities, and others from claiming that he's racist. And many of them extend that same claim to his supporters. But here's the positive in all that. In the movie It's a Wonderful Life, in the closing scene, when George Bailey has been given a second chance at a life he was ready to throw away, and the entire town has come together to support him, they bump the Christmas tree and a bell on it rings. George's daughter, Zuzu, says, "Look, Daddy, teacher says every time a bell rings, an angel gets his wings." I submit to you that as we approach the 2020 election, a modified version of that line will apply. Every time the media denigrates Trump supporters, President Trump gets another vote. The most stupid line, the most ill-advised line, the most politically inept line uttered in the 2016 election belonged to Hillary Clinton when she labeled half of Donald Trump's supporters as deplorable and irredeemable. In the 2020 election, the media and Hollywood and potentially every member of the public who denigrates Trump supporters in that way is reenacting the tremendous adverse effect that had on the Democratic candidate. Like the bell ringing on the Christmas tree in It's a Wonderful Life, giving the character Clarence, the angel, his wings. Every one of these comments will garner Donald Trump a vote and help ensure that he will win again, making sure that it's a wonderful election. Next topic. Connecticut complaint. It's time for an update regarding the transgender athletes issue in Connecticut. As you may recall, I previously addressed the fact that Connecticut allows transgender high school girls who are biological boys to compete against biological girls in track. As a result, 2 transgender girls who are biological boys have won events and set records defeating biological girls. As I've discussed at length in prior episodes, there are multiple physical advantages for transgender females who are biological males in such events. Finally, something is being done about it. 3 girls in Connecticut have filed a federal discrimination complaint in the U.S. Department of Education's Office of Civil Rights against Connecticut's athletic transgender policy, arguing that it violates Title IX. As we've talked about before, Title IX prohibits discrimination based on sex in education programs which receive federal funds. We're all familiar with Title IX in the context of college athletics. It's the reason why colleges have been unable to give short shrift to women's sports in their athletic departments. The argument the claimants are making in this case is that because of the participation of the transgender girls, who are biological boys, the biological girls have been denied a fair and equal opportunity to compete. It alleges that the Connecticut policy, quote, threatens to reverse the gains for girls and women that Title IX has achieved since 1972, close quote. You know from my prior coverage of this issue that I agree. Allowing transgender girls and women who are biological boys or men threatens to destroy girls' and women's sports. Among these claimants, they allege that the participation of the transgender girls who are biological boys has prevented them from reaching the medal stand, and as a result has denied them scholarship opportunities and reduced their visibility to college track team recruiters. The girls challenging the Connecticut policy are being represented by the Alliance Defending Freedom, which has a stellar record, taking cases all the way to the Supreme Court. I'll keep you advised as this complaint moves forward. Next topic. Washington removed. You may have seen coverage of the efforts to remove or cover a mural depicting George Washington at George Washington High School in San Francisco. I was frustrated when I saw that removal or covering was being considered, especially given that the high school was named after George Washington. And I was disappointed when I learned that the board did in fact vote to remove the mural. This is another example of an attempt to erase our history. It's being pushed by some on the left, in this instance as usual. But unlike the norm, there is more than a bit of a split among the left as to this mural. And the fact that there is a split led me to dig a little more. And I found something that's disappointing on part of the side that I usually support. I hadn't been following this particularly closely, and that's a sign of just how common it's unfortunately become to try to erase the past. I had seen coverage of this issue in a Breitbart article, and the start of the article showed a very famous painting of Washington standing in a full dress uniform. I'm sure you've seen the painting many times over the years. Because I hadn't been following very closely, I actually thought that a replica of that painting was what was at issue. It's not. What is at issue is an enormous mural depicting the various stages of George Washington's life. The mural was painted in 1936 by an artist who is definitely well on the left side of the political spectrum, and who very deliberately depicted negative aspects of George Washington's life. The mural depicted a black slave and abused Native Americans who were depicting the negative aspects of America's westward expansion. My quick read of the Breitbart article had led me to believe that the objection had been to the mere depiction of George Washington in light of the fact that he owned slaves, for example. Not that slaves and injured or killed Native Americans had been depicted. Instead, the objection was that the actual depiction of slaves and injured or killed Native Americans was traumatizing to the students. Now, that's actually a better argument than one based on an objection to a simple portrait of George Washington. It doesn't, however, change my position. In fact, it actually adds weight to my objection. I don't believe in erasing history, but I also don't believe in erasing historic art. In that respect, I'm on the side with many on the left who opposed the petition to have the art removed or covered up. In the June 20 edition of datebook.sfchronicle.com, in an article entitled High School Mural Debate, a reminder that destroying art destroys our culture, the San Francisco Chronicle's art critic, Charles Damaris, argues that art which can cause discomfort and even horror can promote learning and growth. How true, and how unfortunate that the San Francisco Board of Education apparently couldn't see that. So what did I find disappointing that's on the part of the side I typically support? The Breitbart coverage. Why did the article not show the actual mural in question? Did they think their readers wouldn't like seeing Washington depicted in a negative way? Maybe. I'd have to speculate to be sure, but if that's the reason, it really is disappointing. This story is different from the typical leftist attempts to erase history, and I really didn't get that from the Breitbart coverage. The fact that I didn't is all the more reason to make sure, as I said in Episode 2, Bursting the Bubble, that you get your news and opinion from multiple sources, including ones with which you disagree, and take it all with a grain of salt. Do you have to take political spirits with a grain of salt? Hopefully not. I try to give you an honest opinion and thorough coverage, and I'll be back next week with honesty and thoroughness. I hope you'll be back as well, and tell your friends about political spirits, and follow me on Twitter at Franklin Rye. This is Franklin Rye. Thank you for listening.